Morning, good morning, good morning. How lovely to see you. Thank you for coming to our session on Blessed Unrest. My name's Tabitha Jackson and I'm the director of the documentary film programme at Sundance Institute and one of the partners, along with the Skoll Foundation, for Stories of Change, which is an almost 10-year-long initiative to bring storytellers and filmmakers together with social entrepreneurs and see what magic things happen. There's a kind of alchemy that happens when you put storytellers, filmmakers, change makers in the same space. So that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And indeed, that's what we'll be doing this morning. You'll see from our wondrous panel, who are all on their devices, but they're going to pay attention in a minute.
The last word was panel.
She's got it. She's got it. So there is a little housekeeping. I've been asked to remind you to silence your cell phones, turn off your devices, except for pacemakers. And we will, when we come to have questions, although this is a lovely intimate room, if you wouldn't mind waiting for the microphone, we are being filmed, and so it'd be lovely if the audience could hear any questions as well. And then there is a survey, which I find rather, it's not really in the spirit of this free and open and easy thing, but we are going to be graded, panel, on whether we're any good or not. So so you should take time to be nice to your jurors, and we might get a good mark out of this. So Blessed Unrest, it's something that it was when I was talking to Corey about this panel, and you mentioned Blessed Unrest, and you mentioned it in relation to the film that you were making, Bending the Arc, which was on last night. Who saw the film, by the way? Woo! Yay! Whoa! Okay, great, wonderful. And it was a phrase that had come up, and we talked about this because it was a phrase from the choreographer and dancer Martha Graham when she was being asked about her work as an artist. And I'll just take a moment to read a little from it. She said, "There is a vitality, a life force, a quickening that is translated through you into action," it's choreography, "and because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. If you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and be lost. The world will not have it." And then she goes on to talk about the kind of sensibility of an artist. No artist is ever pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a queer, divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others. That seemed to resonate with the work of social entrepreneurs in the sense, we talked a little last night about obsolescence. Will your work ever be finished? Will it ever be done? That's the state you desire, but it's hard to achieve. And the same with artists, that sense it could always be better. It's never quite right to keep going on. And friends of mine who are artists talk about how they actually can't be creative when they're kind of fat and happy. They need to be angry. They need to be expressing something. And Roxara, the director of Sunita, that was here last year, talked about the fact she's an Iranian filmmaker. And she was living in San Francisco. She said, I don't know how anyone gets anything done. There don't seem to be any problems here. This was pre-Trump, by the way. She's probably incredibly creative at the moment. Oh, sorry, I've just let my politics slip. So this notion of dissatisfaction, unrest, I think that even though this wonderful forum is about finding common ground, I think there is something very valuable in dissatisfaction and anger as an animating force, and that's what we're going to talk about. I also wanted to invoke, because we have such a fantastic panel who coincidentally all happen to be women, I thought that it would be... Thank you for the applause, and one day we won't even need to applaud that fact, it will just be right. But I thought, just in the interest of inclusion and diversity, I should also speak to the ideas of two old dead white men. The first is Aristotle, who, as you will know in book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Just Search probably does know that actually, he said anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. Aristotle said that. That was so cool. We talk a lot in filmmaking and storytelling about subjectivity. We talk about objectivity too in our journalistic films and objectivity of process. But in independent filmmaking, subjectivity and the ownership of that subjectivity is very important. What compels you to tell this story? What gives you the right to tell this story? Should somebody else be telling this story? And why you? And to understand where you're coming from. It's really important. In filming, literally, where you're filming from is just as important as what you are filming, because it determines what you see and what you don't see. So the third person I want to invoke is Archimedes, because this is where it comes, for me, down to a theory of change. So we have the blessed unrest, the divine dissatisfaction. We have the well-placed, well-directed, right kind of anger at the right time to the right person. And then what do you do with it? So for me, the Archimedes, his theory about levers, he said, give me a place to stand and I can move the earth. And then he went on to say, I also need a really long lever and a fulcrum. But still, that's a powerful sentence. And in a sense, the Archimedes lever theory, the lever and the fulcrum and the standing in the right place, is how I think about our work as storytellers. That the place to stand is your personal perspective, your subjective ownership of that, how you see the world. The long lever is storytelling and film and the act of communication and getting it out into the world. And the fulcrum is the platform. How are people going to find this? Is it going to be in a theatre? Is it going to be on Netflix? Is it going to be in a book? Is it going to come through the radio? So those 3 ideas are things that I would like to explore with this wondrous panel this morning, and to understand how they think about these things in their work. I have no idea if that made any sense whatsoever. I just sat and cobbled it together. But there is something there that fascinates me about this motive force, both for artists, storytellers, and change makers. So why don't we, I think what we'll do, because I see connections between these people, and so what we'll do is I'll have a conversation with 2 of them, and then I'll have another conversation with 2 more of them, and then we'll bring everybody up and open up the room to questions. But before we start, let's just go down the line. I'm not even going to introduce you at this point. When were you last angry, Gillian?
30 minutes ago.
Oh, can you say why?
Yes, I was having a heated conversation with my beloved colleague, and it actually struck me, and I'll talk more about this. I was angry because we were talking about how to ensure right relationship within our organization in a way that enables us to stick to the work and to move it forward. And it relates to this point that we need to be right with ourselves to be able to see and to function and to interact effectively in the world. And anger can complicate that.
Great, it's good. Okay, it's recent. Yeah. We can get done. Professor Agnes Emeagwaju, when were you last angry?
I'm always smiling, but very angry.
That's good. I like that. It's even good. Corey Stern, when were you last angry?
Do you have to say what it was about?
No, but the fact you said that makes me want to ask.
I was angry just this morning as I was trying to get my hair to not look stupid. And then I was angry a little earlier about something fabulously thoughtful.
Of course. Course. Heather Ray, when were you last angry?
I was really angry Tuesday in the plenary when they honored Henry David Thoreau. He was an avid Indian hater, and that land is Wampanoag land. And he was also referred to as the first conservationist in America, which is an absolute fallacy. So I was angry for quite a while about that.
All right, we're going to get to it. So let's have our first conversation. Oh, it's going to be punchy this morning. And let's start, Heather, if you'd like to come up and take a seat, and Gillian too. Great. Heather Ray and Gillian Caldwell. So we'll first we'll come to understand a little about you, and then this is a conversation because I want to understand what gets you going. Heather, you're an incredibly respected producer, and we have the privilege of knowing you because you ran the Native program at Sundance Institute for 6 years, when Robert Redford founded the Sundance Institute to protect creative expression and to champion the independent voice. The Native voice was always incredibly important to him and still is, and that's reflected in the work, and you led that work for many years. And I know that your own Native ancestry and your settler ancestry kind of determines much of how you think about where we are in the world. But give us a sense of how, when we talk about unrest or dissatisfaction or anger, where are you coming from?
So my heart is beating. I'm still angry about the Thoreau thing. He also hated the Irish, and I happen to be an Irish Cherokee. So
it's not a good day. That wasn't a good day for you.
Yeah, it was a difficult moment. I think that much of where I'm coming from right now is I just am, and what creates blessed unrest in my daily life is just facing the reality that, in the United States, which is where I happen to live, or what we now know as the United States, that we are contending with the absolute insistence on a kind of manifest destiny ideology. And America has this, profound mythology about itself and works very hard to maintain that mythology. So part of what that means is that the reality of what happened in the creation of that country is that, there was a genocide of more than 100 million people. And in the play out of things, it's, the aftermath has been that there's really an erasure of the people of the land. And so that manifests itself in, of course, history and literature and education and the sort of national narrative that this country has about itself. And in the particular industry that I work in, that we work in, it's really prevalent. There's never been a Native there's never been a Native television show in the United States. We're entirely absent from, film and television and music and pop culture. In cinema, Native people are basically relegated to kind of a 19th century backdrop for white men who are trying to figure out their lives. And so we really don't know anything about Native people. And part of what that means is that we don't actually know ourselves in that way. We don't have the luxury of having that lens to be able to reflect back, to create our own work, and to be able to speak to one another through these mediums, these artistic mediums, these cultural mediums. And it's something that, it's something I've been working all of my adult life to change. I have not been successful at that. No one has. But I see the way in which it impacts our communities. I mean, the highest rates of suicide in the United States and Canada are Native youth. And so if you never see yourself, if you have no reflection of yourself in the fabric of culture and society, then clearly the message is that you simply don't have enough value, that you mean nothing. And that's perpetuated reality, in the Americas.
And do you have a sense of anger at that? I mean, it's a fantastically
Rage.
articulated, right?
It's 2017. I just can't believe it, that we can't get beyond that. Your work ranges across many territories, and you directed a documentary on John Trudell. And when we were talking earlier,
you told me that he had said, "Don't trust anyone who isn't angry."
He did say that.
What did he mean by that, do you think?
He actually once made bumper stickers that said, "Don't trust anyone who isn't angry." What he meant was that if you don't see what's happening, if you're not cognizant of what's happening in this world, then that probably means that you exist in such a space of privilege that you don't have to know what's happening, that you actually have the luxury of separating yourself from the reality of what is happening in our world. And so that's a space that one should not trust. It's reflective of somebody who is completely complicitous in what is happening in our world. So I think that what he was referring to is that if you're not connected, if you are connected, then that it's inevitable that you're going to experience levels of rage.
Right. It's interesting you talking about visibility and the invisibility in erasure, because we're at a moment in the US and around the world where the native and indigenous voice, as it manifests itself through protecting the land against corporate interests, is becoming more visible. And I wondered if you could talk a little about Standing Rock for people who may not know what it was, and then it will introduce us to a clip from a film that you are currently producing. So tell us about Standing Rock, because there is something about the visibility and the imagery which I think is to do with a romanticization still of the native peoples of North America that actually finally put it on the front pages and on the news bulletins. But
we're trending.
Yeah.
There was a moment in which I think there was, that Standing Rock was actually on the Twitter trending list.
Right.
Standing Rock is, the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation is in North Dakota. It actually straddles North and South Dakota. And the Dakota Access Pipeline is a pipeline that was proposed, the energy company backing it is Energy Transit Partners. And the pipeline was essentially being built to move crude oil from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota 1,100 miles to refineries that are outside of Chicago, somewhere in Illinois. Originally, the pipeline was set to go around Bismarck, North Dakota, which I think is the state capital. It's where the governor lives, and it's a predominantly white community. And that community stood up against the pipeline because they were concerned that the pipeline crossing through their water system could potentially contaminate their water. And so the alternative was to go through Indian country and to go through treaty lands belonging to the Osheti-Shakoi, which is the Great Sioux Nation. And so that's what they did, and they did it without any kind of due diligence and real dialogue with the tribe. To have the conversation about the pipeline crossing the Missouri River and potentially contaminating not even potentially, it's pretty much inevitable. That's what pipelines do, they break. And we know this from various regions in throughout Latin America and in the Amazon regions, and so the inevitability of this pipeline breaking it's there, and that water system goes through native lands where there's about 18 million people. And so at the point that it was evident that it was clear that this pipeline was going to go through, they were there, the energy company was present, they were beginning to build, there were a few individuals within the Standing Rock community who stood up. One of those was LaDonna Brave Bullard, who essentially put the call out to say that they're about to do this and we need your support. We need you to come and stand with us. And the first group of people that came to actually work with LaDonna was a group of Native youth from the surrounding community, and one of which was Bobby Jean Three Legs, who a lot of folks have seen, in media presence. And that first group of Native youth, they actually were runners, and they did a few runs. They ran to Omaha, Nebraska, to the headquarters of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the government entity that's responsible for approving these kinds of energy projects and ultimately colluding with energy companies. And then they also ran to Washington, D.C. with 140,000 signatures trying to rally support, awareness, and solidarity. At the point that they actually began to break ground with the bulldozers, which was in late July, the call came out to ask people to come. There was actually a press release from the tribe asking other nations within the United States and within North America to come and support, and that's what happened. People showed up. And so myself and folks from my own community and family and friends, and we arrived in mid-August when things were really beginning. And this encampment was, in the beginning, was really a camp to ultimately fight the pipeline. That's why everyone was there. Over the course of the next 5 months, it grew to become many different things, and that's a really long conversation. And myself and 2 other Native filmmakers were making a feature-length documentary about Standing Rock, which you'll see a clip. Incidentally, we're the only Native-made project, and so there's maybe 40 or 50 different documentaries being made about Standing Rock, and ours happens to be the only Native-made feature documentary. So it's another complexity of issues in terms of who controls the narrative.
Yeah.
And we were able to do this because of the support from Sundance, the Ford Foundation, and the Redford Center. But it was really initially the Sundance documentary program, Tabitha and Roddy, who reached out to us and said, you need to be telling this story. And we were sort of like, but we're chopping wood, and and so it was a really interesting journey. You know?
And so let's roll this clip. This is Heather's clip, so you can just get a sense of.
Tonight I'd like to talk in honor of the water and the earth and our brother Leonard Peltier. We're faced with a very serious situation in this generation. There are insane people who wish to rule the world. They wish to continue to rule the world on violence and repression. And we are all the victims of that violence and repression. We, as the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, have been resisting this violence and this oppression for 500 years. We know that the black people have been resisting it for at least that long. And we know that the white people have had to endure it thousands of years. And now it's come full swing to this generation that we live in. We cannot allow this to continue to go on because it's a matter of dollars and their illusionary concepts of power. We have to reestablish our identity. We have to understand who we are and where we fit in the natural order of the world. Because our oppressor deals in illusions. They tell us that it is power, but it is not power. They may have all the guns, and they may have all the racist laws and judges, and they may control all the money, but that is not power. These are imitations of power, and they are only power because in our minds we allow it to be power. The brutality of the American corporate state way of life is nothing more than violence and repression, and it has nothing to do with power. It is brutality. It's a lack of a sane balance. They have made us out of balance. They have come into our minds and have come into our hearts and they've programmed us. And because we are out of balance, we no longer have the power to deal with them. See, we are power. We are a part of the natural world. All of the things of the natural world are a natural part of the creation and feed off the energy of our sacred Mother Earth. We are power. We look at the oppressor and we look at the enemy because they have the most guns and the most lies and the most money. People start to feel powerless. We are power. We are a natural part of the creation. We were put here on this sacred Mother Earth to serve a purpose. They have made us to believe they are power, but they are not. They are violent and they are brutal, but they are not power. As a natural part of the earth, we have the energy and the power that is the earth. The earth will take care of us if we will remember the earth.
So Gillian, this sense of corporate interests, people trying to protect natural resources being extracted, is presumably not unfamiliar to you, not just in the US, but around the world. You are CEO of Global Witness. You were 10 years at Witness. There's a witness thing going on. You're not a Jehovah's Witness, are you? No, okay.
Not yet.
All right. In Honduras, Guatemala, people are giving up their lives to protect the land. But tell me how you respond to what Heather has said and just seeing that clip in terms of the work of Global Witness and what you're doing.
Well, just at an emotional level, that was extremely intense for me. I think, when that combination of like rage and grief, it's very deep.
Yeah.
But we focus on exactly, what you're looking at on so many levels. I mean, it's it's this profit at any price mentality, which is just driving us straight off a cliff. It's natural resource exploitation all around the world, which is fueled by unbelievable levels of corruption and environmental and human rights abuse. And we see it across the piece, whether it's gold, tin, tungsten, tantalum, oil, gas, rubber, or forests, and it's ravaging the planet and its people. And the truth is that we have more than enough to survive and thrive. And yet we find ourselves, as was suggested, in a scenario in which, a few men own the vast majority of the world's resources, and it's not getting any better. So, that's the unrest that fuels me and that fuels us.
Why do you think it's that particular thing that gets you in particular?
I think it's at the heart of so much of it. I think it's at the heart of the hearts. You talk about indigenous people, and defenders. I mean, we document the assassination of earth and land rights defenders around the world every year. And last year was the deadliest year in history. An estimated documented 3 killings per week, largely indigenous community members around the world, who are just trying to protect not just their livelihoods, but their way of life. I mean, Native peoples are so deeply connected to the earth, and it's a part and parcel not just of how they feed their families, but of how they understand the world. And in fact, there's a lot to learn from that. I had the same rage as you did when there was reference to, I heard him saying, in fact, that Thoreau was the first conservationist in the world, which was disgusting, because conservationists date back to time immemorial, and we could learn a lot more from them. So I don't know. It's hard for me to put a finger on it, but certainly I think at this stage in the game that the biggest challenge we face as a human family is climate change. And if we don't get a handle on this race to the bottom in terms of the drive for the profit that these resources can generate, we are not going to survive. The earth will slough us off, like the heathens we are.
And it's I mean, the indigenous, and I had very little about this, so I shouldn't even start this sentence, but it seems that the indigenous approach to the land and the native approach to the land is one of stewardship. And so it's not just about a preservation of their way of life. They are looking after the earth as we all should be doing, but are failing to. So the tragic irony that they are the people who are at the front lines getting killed is not lost. Let's have a look at the clip that you've chosen, which is to do with your work in Myanmar, Burma. Can you give us a sense of what that is?
So this is an investigation that we completed just over a year ago, and what we revealed is that our sort of methodology is do a deep level investigation, expose that problem, and clarify the solution, the way forward, and then drive advocacy to address the problem. So we revealed through our investigation that the jade industry in Myanmar is worth an estimated $31 billion a year, which would be 46% of Myanmar's GDP. And that money is not making its way into the national treasury. In fact, that money is being owned and managed and controlled by 10 people off books via anonymous bank accounts. A range of the former military dictator and a range of cooks, cronies, and drug dealers.
What?
And that's
what? 10 what? 10 people are taking 46% of Burma's GDP and putting it in their own pockets.
The potential 46%.
Holy
I mean, that's the point.
Okay.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And go back to indigenous peoples. The land they're raping was confiscated under a constitutional provision in the name of economic development from the Kachin people and is a deep source of conflict. I mean, that's another thing we look at, the ways in which natural resources fund or fuel violent conflict around the world. So this has massive ecological implications. You know, it means, you know, that country struggles to, you know, to feed and house and educate its youth.
Yeah.
And you know, the degradation's intense. So anyway, I mean, the campaign, you know, we've had some successes and we continue to progress that work, but you can take a look.
Let's take a look at this.
A single kilogram of Kachin's best jade can fetch millions of dollars overseas. Global Witness estimates that $31 billion worth was mined in 2014 alone, equivalent to almost half the GDP for the entire country. Such wealth could transform the future of Kachin State and the country. But for now, local people see few benefits. Instead, they have been forced aside by secretive companies with powerful military connections. These companies make vast sums of money, shattering the landscape and stealing the local population's best chance of a more prosperous future.
တော်တော်မြင့်တဲ့တောင်တွေတော့တောင်တွေကျွန်တော်တို့ငယ်ငယ်ကလေးကကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ရှိရတဲ့ဟာဒီနေ့ပျောက်သွားပြီဒီတောင်အင်မတန်မြင့်တဲ့တောင်တွေကအခုကခြိုက်ဝမ်းနဲ့ဖြစ်ကုန်တာပေါ့နော်အိုရိုချောင်းအိုရိုမြစ်လို့ခေါ်တယ်ချောင်းလို့တော့မခေါ်ဘူးအရင်တော့ငါးရေနေတာသွားတယ်နေလို့ရဒီကနေ့ကသွားကြည့်လို့ရှင်အိုရိုကချောင်းတမဟုတ်အိုင်တို့အကက်ကိုနီနီရဲရဲနဲ့အင်မတန်ညစ်ပတ်တဲ့စွန့်ပစ်ရေတွေပေါ့နော်
Many companies are secretly controlled by the families of army generals, hidden behind networks of front companies and other proxies.
So we can look at all that and think, oh, that's terrible what they are doing over there. Am I in any way implicated?
Right, so there's reference to this secret network of companies, and one of the things that we've understood over time is that the kind of the getaway cars for you know, these criminal activities are something called anonymous companies, and those are companies. You can't see the so-called beneficial owner. You can't see and understand who actually owns the wealth behind the company. You can essentially pay a registered agent to, you know, to form the company in your own name. And the companies that you should really be concerned about are the ones that have 123 subsidiary related anonymous companies. So we did an investigation, and this is not just a problem over there. I mean, it's so easy to point the finger at corruption, you know, and talk about how, you know, Africa is corrupt or Myanmar is corrupt. You know, we did an undercover investigation in New York City where we posed as an advisor to a West African minister who essentially wanted to launder hundreds of millions of dollars that he didn't get honestly. And 13 out of 16 attorneys that we met with and filmed on hidden cameras, including the then head of the American Bar Association, told us how to do it using anonymous companies that would be formed inside the United States, which is one of the chief incorporators of anonymous companies around the world.
And the UK doesn't get off the hook either.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, well, but at least the UK is demonstrating some leadership. And when we started this campaign to end anonymous companies, for which we won the TED Prize, people thought we were insane. It was an arcane topic. Why does this matter? You know, this is at the heart of, you know, fueling aid-dependent economies around the world. You know, the UK has now, you know, under Cameron's leadership, and we'll see how it goes, you know, with May, we're working on it. But the UK and 23 other companies have now made commitments to make beneficial owners visible.
Right, right. So this is interesting, and I mean, it's fascinating that you are both approaching, as it were, the same. You are channeling your anger about the same thing in different ways, Heather, through storytelling and showing. Look at this, look at these people, look at what is going on, look at yourself. You are describing, and Gillian, through the work of Global Witness, it's a different kind of revelation, which is really shining a light into the dark shadows and saying, understand this, and you are involved. And I think that kind of complicity, that shows why this differentiation between filmmakers and change makers. It's not really there. We're in this together, but using different tools. So let us swap you out momentarily for our next two panelists, and then we'll bring you back later. Thank you so much, Heather and Gillian. And actually, Heather, when we were talking earlier, you talked about resistance, recognition, responsibility, and reconciliation as a kind of continuum. I sense you're still in the resistance phase, which is very powerful to behold, but it's great. There's a theory there. So there's theory of change. Let me say it again. Resistance, recognition, responsibility, and reconciliation. So now I have a wondrous two additional panelists, Corey Shepherd-Stern and Professor Agnes Benaguajo. It's lovely to see you again. We were together last night during the film. And again, ostensibly filmmaker and change maker, but Corey, you are filmmaker and change maker through Strong Heart. And Dr. Agnes, your stories, you are a storyteller, obviously, as well as an incredible change maker. So let's jump in with Corey. What prompted you? What were you channeling in wanting to make Bending the Arc?
Actually, I have a very skull-like answer to that.
Oh yes. Does it involve supply chains?
Supply chains of rage. Yes. Okay.
Supply chains of rage. Yes.
I'm going to answer
Hashtag.
you with an interpretive dance. No. Actually, I'm going to answer you with a poem. Because yesterday I was in the collaboration, the tent.
Yeah.
The one with all the food.
Collaboration Cafe.
Yeah. Okay. And someone came up to me that I didn't know and said, "Oh, I want to introduce myself. I work." It was this guy here, Shri. And he said, "I work with." He knows we have friends in common. He's a doctor. He runs HEAL. They work on Navajo Nation and other places, doing work very similar to PIH. And they're sort of, we call them the praxis babies, right there, wherever Cassia is. That's what Cassia calls them. And I just do whatever Cassia does. And anyway, we started talking, and I quickly, discovered poetry in common, cut to the chase. He read me a poem he wrote. And I ended up, in tears, sobbing in the midst of everyone around. And this poem, then, we made him come and give a reading at our after party last night.
Well, we want to hear it.
We would like you to hear it now.
Shri, would you mind reading your poem for us?
Up here.
Is this a poem that you wrote?
Yes.
So this is the poet laureate of Global Health.
Do come to the front, poet
So
laureate.
he's a doctor and a poet.
All right, thanks for having me. So this is called On AIDS in Tanzania. Something as simple as a pill in the palm of her hand. This Tanzanian woman sings as she breastfeeds. They say it was the rain, but it was always my tears and sweat which brought up the maize. They said the railroads will bring a new day, but it was always diamonds going with the sunset the other way. And now she dies and is dying. Something as simple as a pill in the palm of her hand. This Tanzanian woman, brilliant orange head wrap, red African mud between her toes, any pill, anything close to healing, she does not hold in the palm of her hand. Her left breast sags in the sun, ribs exposed a continuum with the spine of her too large wooden chair. She resembles the chair, both of them frail, twigs, ready to snap. A pill, something as simple as a pill in the palm of her hand scathed, rough as maize husk. She dies and is dying. Her 5-month-old baby boy born at dawn suckles at her dry left breast. He suckles ashes from her left breast. Something as simple as a pill in the palm of her hand. Who owns this pill? What plant or human genome extract gave birth to it? Who cut the compound, packaged it into a compact cure? In which boardroom, what lawyers patented it? Blue suits and leather suitcases, tucking death into the space between fine print. Who keeps the cash? Which markets rose while she fell? Which corporate graph will track her demise? Who will clench their fists, one over the other, as she opens her hand? This Tanzanian woman, her baby boy born at dawn, who will begin to ask for a moratorium on their death penalty? Something as simple as a pill in the palm of her hand. And who will join this standing up, a reach to claim the pill, demand the pill, and place it in her hand? Something as simple and good as healing, a pill in the palm of her hand.
That's incredibly powerful, and we sense a quiet rage in what would have made you write that poem. That's unbelievably powerful, and I think these ways of expression, whether there's something about poetry that just distills everything down to the essence. Every word is meaningful, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thanks, Corey, for bringing that in. That's hard to pick up a conversation from, but
well, that is very much for me. The origin story of Bending the Arc was I was in running away from Hollywood. I was an American refugee in Nigeria, basically. I had been a TV executive working for Power Rangers and needed a break, and so I went to Nigeria, and I was basically I was there in the midst of the AIDS crisis when everyone was dying everywhere, and it was so stupid. And I was coming from West Hollywood where my friends were all on antiretrovirals and surviving, and it just seemed like it was stupid and there weren't enough people. And basically that's where it came from for me, was like, who is doing something about this? And I learned about a very simple drug called nevirapine, and if you gave antiretrovirals to a mother during, she would basically give birth to a baby born free of the disease, because they would get HIV, forgive me for not being a doctor, but by aspirating fluid during birth. Anyway, bottom line is, I heard about this pill that if you gave a single pill to the mother, basically during labor, and a little bit of liquid, teaspoon of liquid or something, to the baby within 4 to 6 hours of birth, it would cut the risk of HIV transmission by 60%. It was 80 cents a dose. And there's all kinds of reasons why that's stupid, because you want to actually give the full course of treatment to the mother so that they don't give birth to an orphan. But I thought, well, why can't we give this to everyone right now? Whoa, let's all stop making shoes and bags and TVs, and let's all dedicate everything to doing this. And someone said, well, there aren't enough doctors to give this medicine. And I was like, okay, well, what do you have to do to give it? And they said, well, you have to give them a pill, and then you have to give some liquid to the baby. I was like, well, I could do that. There's enough people here to make this happen. So they said, you can't do that. A doctor or a nurse has to do that. And I was like, okay, wait. And there's a lot of people here. And eventually I found Paul's Lancet article that was about how he trained community health workers to deliver care. I'm not saying they should do surgery, but they could give a pill. And that's how I first heard about Paul Farmer. And I'm from Hollywood. If you don't fix the problem, you're going to get fired. You're going to get in trouble. So.
Yeah. You have a history of fixing quite a lot of problems through your work. Should we have a quick, I know most of you saw it, but I love this clip. It's worth watching it again just for that reason. Let's run Corey's clip. Oh, do you need to set this up in any way?
We just want an opportunity. An opportunity to live.
I had been invited to debate a guy from the World Bank. The World Bank had not been endorsing AIDS treatment.
You've made a compelling emotional argument, Paul. Yet I'd hope that even those among you who are firmly convinced by Dr. Farmer's forceful presentation will suspend your judgment for the next few minutes to listen to a different view.
He was saying prevention, that's the only thing that works.
I conclude that governments should pay more attention to prevention because much of prevention would not be done without government intervention.
And that you don't give a man fish, you teach him how to fish.
It's important to note that it's not just that people haven't been taught to fish. Their boats have been destroyed, their nets shredded, and their fleets have been sunk.
AIDS activists, they had been saying the same thing. You can't say that Africans with AIDS can't get treatment. That's bullshit.
Bankers in generally, my suspicion is they're not getting a lot of sex because they spend a lot of time screwing the poor.
My friends in Africa and other developing countries die within just a couple of years of being diagnosed with HIV because they have no access to treatment.
We were like, we're gonna put pressure on the drug companies, we're gonna put pressure on governments, while people like Paul and Jim at Partners in Health were saying, we'll provide proof that drugs can be used in resource-poor developing countries effectively.
None of our patients have died. One person died a few days after starting therapy because we started too late. And isn't that the lesson of the last 20 years? We started too late. We always start too late.
Absolutely, Paul. And I want to bring in Professor Binagwaho here as well, because when I asked you, you also, as most of you know, appear in Bending the Arc, paediatrician, Minister of Health for Rwanda until 2016, now Vice Chancellor of the University of Global Health Equity.
And still Dr. Agnes.
And still Dr. Agnes, we can't help it. But when I asked you to reflect on this notion of anger or dissatisfaction and which clip from the film, you chose that clip.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's a condensé of everything. Sitting here or being in this room, we can see that it's the same fight we all do. It's a fight against everything that avoid human to develop, to be healthy. There is so, as you say, enough things around us not to fight around it and not to give and not to share. And this clip is about that. You have young people around the world, and old people as well, but who have stood up in solidarity of a continent that was dying. And it was at the time I came back from Europe to Africa after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And I found a country totally destroyed. But it was destroyed by the Western world. We don't have iron in our country. We don't build harm, shoot gang and things like that. All this was given as a development fund. Can you imagine? From the World Bank. The weapon that killed us was a development tool. So
yeah, look, can I stop? I found the document. It was from the World Bank. The giant chunk of money that went to buy the guns for the genocide in Rwanda was from the World Bank, and was the second allotment was given even after the World Bank knew that it was itemized weapons.
And you know what? Machetes. It was not a gift. It was a loan.
It was a loan.
And we had the survivor to pay it.
Yes. I have the itemized bill.
Because it was a state loan. The cynicism of people who have the well-off, that's what makes me angry.
Yeah.
Because it's the same. They are killing and they don't care. They just don't know that they will die just a little after us. That's stupid. We try, in fact, we do them good. We try to save them.
This cynicism, there's the cynicism, the greed, the neglect, but there also I think can be a kind of well-meaning ineptitude that can have tragic consequences
Like
from the
what?
attitude. Well, like what? Let's run the next clip, shall we? Dr. Agnes's clip.
Well-meaning ineptitude.
We continue to improve. Our people are in better health. But we have more challenges because we don't have in...
I'm sorry, can we hold for 1 second?
Il y a un problème? Oui. Oh là là. Allô, Thierry? Oui? Et il vient d'où? Isolement direct. Tu ne dois pas m'appeler, tu le mets à Kanombe. Vous mettez un lit, vous faites une chambre, tout de suite. Et vous retracez, on s'en fiche. Non, envoyez pas le médecin, envoyez l'ambulance, guys. Vous allez juste mettre plus de gens à risque. Vous l'amenez là, il dort là, on fait l'examen, on prend le sang est à Kampala ce soir. Et vous mettez en isolement tous les gens qui ont été en contact avec lui. Tous isolement, bloqués maintenant, tout. Oui, bloquez-les. Thank you. First suspected case of Ebola.
Threats of the deadly Ebola virus finally landing in the East African region.
All borders are informed and screen anyone coming in Rwanda.
It became clearer and clearer to me that this was getting completely out of hand. The infectious disease doctors I know were more scared than I'd ever seen them before.
I was feeling panicky. It was already wiping out the caregivers, including the professionals.
And I called Paul, and Paul said, "Oh my God, it's so bad. This is the worst thing any of us have ever seen."
Just to back up a step,
So it's not an Hollywood scene, huh? She was just in front of me when I got that call, and I was so shocked that I forgot to tell her, stop filming. Because I should have told her, stop filming. I was so shocked. It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, it's an incredible filmic moment, but it also comes after, under your policies and taking a kind of partners in health model of the preferential treatment for the poor and scaling community health work, and the life expectancy in Rwanda doubled, and so you're in charge of this incredibly vibrant, successful system of public health, and then Ebola strikes, and Cory was there, captured the moment. What was the background? Who is the he you were talking about? What was
This is this inaptitude to reflect when they should. Okay, it was a young German guy full of love for the humankind who went in Sierra Leone to help the country in Ebola. So he went in contact with the virus, with people who are sick. He landed in Rwanda without telling anyone. And he started to have fever, to vomit, to have diarrhea. He went in the 3 biggest hospitals without still saying, I'm coming from Sierra Leone. He was in touch with the emergency ward of those 2 hospitals. Up to the 2nd hospital, he said, I'm so panicking, because we all know how the infection enter in a country. It's always through
Germans.
No. No. And no, Nigeria they lost 100 people by a single man who was a criminal for me, because he knew that he was sick. He went in a plane, he landed in Nigeria. And he collapsed in the airport. All the people who touched him died. And so we just see that during 20 years we have made this effort. We have tried to bring the health in the more remote village, etc. And somebody is coming to destroy all this by inaptitude, but it's not on, it's criminal.
Did you ever meet him?
Yes. But he was not a bad guy, and he swore to dedicate his life to save the world in a more intelligent manner. And I say, okay, you are going to do a press conference in Rwanda and swear that in front of the Rwandan people. He did it. He was not a bad guy, but...
How was the conversation with him?
Very bad. Because he didn't want to go in quarantine.
He didn't want to go into quarantine?
Yeah.
He wanted out of quarantine.
He wanted, he said, but me, I'm a German. But I said, I don't care, go. So I make some mistake because normally you cannot put a foreigner in quarantine without informing the Red Cross, his embassy, etc. But this was at 7 o'clock at night.
It was, yeah.
It was at 7 o'clock at night, so I did all this.
It was Ebola!
And he was afraid to go in a black country quarantine, but it was a five-star quarantine. We were ready to all be quarantined one day because Ebola, they don't announce it. So I told him, you go or we come and close you. So he went with a friend. We gave him a telephone so he can call everybody. He called his embassy, what I did. So the next day, I had to, the country had to apologize to Germany. Can you imagine?
Oh,
can you imagine? I say, I will never do that. The Minister of Foreign Affairs will do that. And it was not Ebola. What was good, it was very bad malaria. But it put us really, the most important is to know all the people he was in contact with had to be quarantined. So we had to go in those two hospitals and took everybody and put them in the next one. Yeah.
Can I just say though, the fact that it was very bad malaria means he didn't take his malaria meds when he was traveling to Sierra Leone, and he used your medical resources for treatment. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry.
So this is what we call South-North cooperation. But I remember a nurse that was a breastfeeding mom. At the time she was going home to breastfeed, we asked her to enter in the ambulance to be quarantined. We were in charge to inform all those families that we quarantined their people for 48 hours. And that's what it was terrible.
Mm. And were you experiencing anger at that point? What were you feeling during all that?
That, you should see me inside, it was fire. I even don't understand I was so calm. It's just because I had to give direction and take decision. If not, thanks God he was not in front of me, because I'm not sure that my mom will be proud of me. It's my reaction I will have. It is terrible because it can be did you see what happened in Sierra Leone and Guinea? Their GDP was like that, became a third. Mm. People start dying like in the Middle Age. Everything that was built disappeared.
And that moment, that could have been what happened to Rwanda. Yeah. Wow, extraordinary. And Cassie, we talked about Cassie. When we spoke, we had some interaction, and you talked about a theory of change around partners in health, it was kind of threefold, if I remember. But one was about implementation and the work on the ground. The other was about influence and movement building, and storytelling in this film will be part of that. And the other was the policy lever, and Jim Yong Kim being president of the World Bank. That seems a pretty effective tool to use. I just wondered, do you think, Agnès, for your theory of change, what is it? Is anger, unrest, dissatisfaction, is that any part of it?
I think because if you are happy, and I like the idea that don't trust somebody who is satisfied with the life we have. Because if we had all a nice breakfast, I think I took 5 coffee, there are people who are not going to eat today. And there are many. The majority of the world will not have a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. So we enjoy it, but we should not be satisfied. The stupid deaths, the people who die, there is enough now on earth, enough wealth for all the humanity to be at maximum of its health, be educated, and we have criminals that are confiscating their potential, when we could share everything and still be wealthy. And all those people, what they are going to be is just they are going to die rich in the cemetery. In their coffin, they will turn in white bones like me.
And they could still die rich and have enough for everyone.
So that means this imbalance of sharing wealth that in fact belong to nobody, just to the earth where we are, it's something that should enrage all of us.
Yeah. So equity, stupid deaths, erasure and invisibility, accountability. Let us open up to the room and get some questions or thoughts about unrest. I'm going to pull these chairs in and get Heather and Gillian to come up as well. And if you could wait for a mic, I did see a hand over there. Yes, this lady here, and we'll get the mic to you.
Hi, I'm Pia Infante. I, in fact, live in San Francisco, and I will say, thanks to gentrification, it is not so idealistic. But thank you for this panel. I want to ask you all a question that sort of keeps me up at night, which is, in terms of changing the minds of those with unchecked power, we've heard that data doesn't always work, but stories do. So could you say more about the power of story? I just want to mention that my friend and colleague, Sonia Childress, recently wrote a post called Beyond Compassion. And she's posing the idea that even documentaries that are trying to elicit compassion for people who are at the sort of brunt end of this economy, that even the cultivation of compassion is not enough to make a shift. So just wondering if, any of you want to speak to what is it then that we aim for in terms of changing or shifting the minds and behaviors of those who are controlling the levers that we don't have hands on.
Changing the narratives. Do you know what? I'm gonna be very rude but opportunistic and come to Lynette, because Lynette is one of our storytellers from the Sundance delegation. She was here with Collisions last year, and you have been you've been around the world with Collisions, and you have practically whispered in the ears of the people who make decisions that affect the world, whispered in their ears with story. Can you reflect on this question?
We have, yes. I something. So Nicole over there is a producer of Collisions. I guess I have come from creating a series of work which I hoped to make change, and I found myself putting the work already and always in front of people who had the same position that I had when I made the work. And then I found an invitation to the World Economic Forum, and I placed my work in a very different place for the first time in front of people who I never imagined that the work would be in front of. And I found them responding in the same way as all of those people who had the same position that I had, in the sense that I know what you're saying about empathy, but there's something about opening a channel in the heart. And then it's about what you do next, actually. So empathy is one thing. So being able to provide a moment when I can see something from a completely different perspective, which is what storytelling does, but also for a moment that I can see my place in that story. And then if directly after that, so there's storytelling, and then there's the thing that comes after that. Then if directly after that, someone asks you a pointed question, so what are you going to do now? not from the place of having the data, but from the place of having the feeling. Then you find different answers coming from those very people who have the power to make a different choice that impacts what happens in a lot of our lives. So we found ourselves in Vienna at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty meetings, at the General Assembly of the UN in New York, a day before a decision on a resolution to ban nuclear weapons. And this work was shown to those people who were making those decisions. So there's the rage that everyone here is talking about. There's the power of the storytelling that we've seen. And then I think there's the direct moment after, which as filmmakers we often miss because we don't know how to have those conversations. But from my perspective, those are the conversations that create the change. Because the feeling leads to a different thought, and then the thought can lead to a different action.
Wonderful. Great. Another question. Yes, sir. If we come here.
Can I add something?
Of course. Yes,
So
Dr. Anya.
this is the link between the using your skills to influence the top. But the true change comes with empowering the victims.
Yeah.
And the story you tell, empower them. Because it gives them the true narrative and give them the sense of, yes, I feel it's unjust, but it's really unjust.
Yeah, empowerment. Stories as empowerment. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Dixon Osborne, Center for Justice and Accountability in San Francisco. I think a common thread for many of us here is anger, is that we are trying to address injustices in all the different fields that we face. And every step forward we make, we're always dissatisfied because there are other steps that we need to take forward, take to move things forward. But I don't know that anger is the right answer, because if it is just anger, no, look at the anger that's on the other side right now. Look how polarized the United States is. Look at the anger that is welling up from all the anti-populist movements across the globe. So I would like some reflections. I'm wondering if the answer really isn't about justice and about trying to figure out the messages and messengers to correct that injustice.
Great question. Gillian.
Yeah, I'm glad you make that point, because I think in my experience, rage is actually the flip side of love. If something makes me angry enough to feel rage, underneath it all, it's because something I care so deeply about is at risk, and it really ultimately is a sort of a driving sense of the importance of justice and fairness and equality in the world. So I'd agree. I think it's so interesting. This morning I got an invitation from one of my many tribes to join a conference call on honoring anger. So I think there's something, recognize that anger comes from a place, in so many instances, anger in its purest form comes from a place of love, and it's an opportunity. And we need to harness that and find a way for that to fuel us rather than enervate us and infuriate us. And I thought the poem that you read in the beginning, or the commentary, I think it was Aristotle's, around how you channel that and how you function in a place of power with the anger is so important. The only other point I want to make about story, and as you know, having run Witness for 10 years, I really believe in the power of story to drive change, but it's not always enough. And the truth is that, Hegel, which is a company that has been basically absconding with land throughout Cambodia, did not respond to the many stories we told them about the impact this was having on local people and the illegality they were engaged in. They responded when we talked to their potential investors about their problems. That's when the commitment was made to return the land. So, story has its limits.
Their response to fair. Because everybody wants to look good, even the bad guys.
Yeah.
Can I add one? Standing Rock was a prayer camp. It was a camp that was in a movement that was driven by love, and in particular love for culture and love for the generations to come. It was a fight for water. It was the people that were there to defend water, and it was entirely from a space of commitment and love for for our future, really. So I wanted to say that because I didn't know it was going to be cut.
That's. I think that's important. I think this question about justice is important. If the world was just, would we cease to be angry? I don't know. No, we've just got a couple of minutes left. We will make it available. Jess, you're such a disruptor. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Mark Wolf. I'm a federal judge in Boston. I'm here in my capacity as chair of Integrity Initiatives International, a new NGO that, among other things, primarily advocates for the creation of an international anti-corruption court to hold the kleptocrats accountable who permit their countries to be looted. And there was undoubtedly corruption in getting $40 billion out of Myanmar. I wanted to share with you 2 literary quotes and ask a question. The first, I'm confident, will resonate, and perhaps some of you will incorporate it. I don't mean to encourage messianic delusions, but William Blake wrote in Auguries of Innocence, "The voice of honest indignation is the voice of God." And the second, I would have thought would have resonated with everybody, but now I wonder, Patrick Alley, the inspirational founder of Global Witness, and I had a brief discussion about this Monday night when we sat with the delegate who said she had started an NGO and she knew it would completely solve the problem it was designed to address. And indeed, you asked last night, Paul Farmer, when is the end of this? And I was a little surprised he didn't say, we'll never get to 100%. William Faulkner got the National Book Award in 1955. He had a concept. He had once said his generation would be judged by the splendor of its failures. And he talked about this from the artist's perspective. He said, by artist, I mean, of course, everyone who has tried to create something which was not here before him. And then he goes on, that is primarily, and I think its essence, all we ever really tried to do. And I believe we will all agree that we failed, that what we made never quite matched and never will quite match the shape, the dream of perfection which we inherited and which drove us and will continue to drive us even after each failure, until anguish frees us and the hand falls still at last. And I've always thought that it's in the nature of ideals that they'll never be permanently and completely achieved, but that doesn't disparage their importance. And so I wonder, for the panel and perhaps to plant the question with everybody here, do you really expect to succeed? And if you don't, does that diminish the value of your effort?
Great question. That's going to be the last question, and these answers are going to be a little.
Okay, so I'll try to say this quickly. So, in interviewing Jim Kim, right, and pretty intensely, and knowing Jim always says, when we started this, we always expected we were going to be on the side of the loser. That we were always going to be on the side of the loser, and yet it was worth doing. But what happened was China, we never expected China. So he then goes from I thought he was going to say something beautiful, as Jim does, but then he goes, but we never expected China. So if you look at the recent World Economic Report and where Jim is at the World Bank, they just released this, but like the number of people that have risen out of extreme poverty and the standard of living, how it has risen for almost everyone in the world except for middle-class whites in the US and Europe. But just the sheer gains that we have made is extraordinary. And so is it all ever going to be completely fixed? No, but oh my God, it is really possible to make a really good life for a lot of people. And I think if we buy into the bullshit, honestly, that I have maybe in the past, like, it's wrong. Optimism is a moral choice. It is possible. To me. So I do think that, I think it's beautiful to judge by the splendor of our failures. I'm like, oh my God, yes, I love that. But then what? It's totally, I look at what you've done, the steepest declines in mortality ever recorded in human history have happened in Rwanda over the last 20 years. And it's possible, in my opinion.
But that I think is the point. There can be progress, but as long as one child dies, one person still has resistant type tuberculosis,
Can I
it's not
tell you
complete
something?
success.
Can I tell you something?
This is going to be the
Don't
end.
spend your time looking at your failure. Go at the step you have, one by one, to the success. Nobody will reach there. And imagine now that all the humanity is well off. There will be still a devil to revert it. So the fight will continue and forever.
That is precisely the point.
So just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. One is the survey. I, for one, think they did pretty well, so you might want to give them a nice mark as you grade them. The second thing is I learn everything I know from Jess Search, and Jess Search always gives her panelists gifts, so I'm going to do the same. Thinking about anger, and as the only British woman on this, the way that we channel our anger in the UK is through cups of tea. So I brought some tea for each of you, and so Corey, no more deaths from stupidity. Dr. Agnes, global health equity. Gillian, accountability. And Heather, visibility. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you all.